Hey boys and girls, today I am going to show you how to do long division. So you'll need this page of notes in front of you and a pencil ready to follow along. But before we get started with our lesson, I have a question for you. Does McDonald's sell burgers? Does McDonald's sell burgers? Well, to answer that, we need to have an expert, a former employee of McDonald's. Who do you know that's a former employee of McDonald's? How about Mrs. Davis? Yes, that is me 22 years ago, a senior in high school. That was my first job working at McDonald's, and I worked there for 5 years. That's how I paid for college. So, Mrs. Davis from the past, we have a question for you. Does McDonald's sell burgers? And the answer, yes, is absolutely a resounding yes. I came home smelling like grease every day after work. Yes, McDonald's sells lots and lots and lots of burgers. Now, why in the world am I asking you that question? I'll show you in just a second. So let's just review what we've done so far with division with remainders. Last week I read this book to you, and we actually used jelly beans to count out the groups and how many were left over. Then we did a paper together where we had little dots on the page, and those dots, I arranged them for you so that they worked out all nice and pretty. If you were dividing by 3, there was 3 in a row. If you were dividing by 4, there were 4 in a row. I made it nice and easy for you. And then you practiced that on your own yesterday with the battery riddle. Today is kind of a bridge between what we just did and what you're going to work on the rest of the week. Today, I'm going to show you how to mathematically solve long division problems without using a picture and just using multiplication facts. And so that's what we call long division, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. However, I'm still including pictures in today's notes because today is a day to help your brain connect what we did with pictures to what we're going to do on paper without pictures. Because the rest of the week, you'll have assignments where there aren't any pictures. Here's what you'll do on Wednesday, and here's your Thursday and Friday assignment. And really, for the rest of your life, most people don't pull out and draw little tiny dots on a piece of paper to solve a division problem. So I'm going to show you how to do that. When we solve problems on paper for division, we call them long division. And we call them long division because it's kind of long to do. In fact, there's actually 4 steps that you have to go through to solve a division problem this way. So does McDonald's sell burgers? That is the question that's going to help us remember those steps. The does has a D in it, which stands for divide, our first step. The M in McDonald's stands for multiply. The sell has the S for subtract. And then our 4th step, the burger step, is called bring up. And that's not a mathematical step, it's just a rewriting to give our final answer step. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. So does McDonald's sell burgers helps us to remember the 4 steps for long division. Divide, multiply, subtract, bring up. So let's go ahead and solve this first problem together. And remember that I'm going to go back and forth between the mathematical way of solving it and the picture way. The picture way will help you understand the mathematical way that we're working through it. So here's our steps. Does McDonald's sell burgers? Divide, multiply, subtract, bring up. And we're going to go ahead and work on our first step of dividing. So let's bring in our McDonald's expert to help us think through this problem. This problem, 64 divided by 7, what we're really trying to figure out is how many groups of 7 can I make in 64? So I've got 64 here. How many groups of 7? And what we've done in the past is circle groups of 7. We're going to use a multiplication table to help us figure this out mathematically. So what we're looking at, if you think about it, as I'm circling those groups, I'm circling groups of 7, and I'm using those cubes up, or those dots or whatever they are, I'm using them up as I put them into groups. So another way to think about this problem is, what number times 7 gets me the closest to 64 without going over? Let me say that again. What number times 7 gets me the closest to 64 without going over? So in other words, here's one group of 7, here's 2 groups of 7, here's 3 groups of 7, here's 4 groups of 7, here's how many I'd use up if I made 5 groups of 7. So I have 64. So I want to make as many groups of 7 as I can, but I can't go past 64 because that's how many I have to work with. So if I'm looking at my 7 stacks and thinking about those, I can see that 63 is the closest I can get. But 63 isn't the answer I'm looking for. That's how many I'll use up as I make those groups of 7. The question I'm trying to solve is how many groups of 7 did I make? Or what number times 7 gets me the closest to 64 without going over? So to do that, once I find this answer in the multiplication table, I just go over off to the side to see how many groups that was. So if I have 63, that means I made 9 groups of 7. That's the division answer. That was a lot of thinking with the multiplication table. It might help you make sense of that answer to go ahead and do it with the picture. Now remember, I said that these are as base 10 blocks. So the last 2 activities you did with pictures, I already divided it up. So they were in like rows of 7 if you were dividing by 7. This one is like base 10 blocks where there's 10 in each row. So you'll have to do a little more thinking to circle these. So if I'm making groups of 7, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 1 group, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7, 8, and 9. So as I circle groups of 7, I could make 9 groups of 7 if I had 64 total. That's the dividing step. And that's really what we're doing is division, right? But there's more to this problem than just how many groups I can make. We also know that sometimes we can have a remainder. And if you were looking at this picture, you can tell what the remainder is just by looking at it. Hi, Joe, remainder of 1. But if we don't have a picture in front of us, we're going to have to do some steps mathematically to figure out what's left over. And that's where these last 3 steps come in. So after we figured out how many groups we can make, then we have to figure out what's left over. And it's going to take us 3 steps to do it. It sounds like a lot, but it's really not that complicated. Let me show you how we're going to find out what's left over mathematically. So step number 2 is to multiply. And here's my thinking for multiplying. I'm thinking, how many cubes did I use up making those 9 groups of 7? So if I started with 64 altogether, I need to know what's left over. That's going to be my remainder when I'm done dividing. But in order to know what's left over, I need to know how many I used up making those groups. How many of those are in groups right now? And that is a multiplication problem. I'm going to take the 9 groups that I made with 7 in each group, and I'm going to multiply those 2 numbers together. 9 times 7. And looking at my multiplication table, it's really easy. I'm just going to flip that arrow and think about it going backwards. 9 times 7 is 64. And I'm going to write that answer, 63. 9 times 7 is 63. And I'm going to write that answer right underneath my 64 so that it's all set up for me to do a subtraction problem next. So that's what that looks like. If you want to picture it and look at it here with your blocks, you can see that right now I have 63 cubes that are in groups that have already been used up making my 9 groups of 63. So now to figure out what's left over, I move to step number 3, subtract. And my thinking here when I subtract is after I make as many groups as I can, what is left over? That's a subtraction problem. So 64 minus 63, 4 minus 3 is 1. And there he is, my 1 left over that matches my picture. And then the last step is just a rewriting step to get my final answer. The B stands for bring up. So I'm going to take that 1 that's now at the bottom of the problem as my answer to the subtraction, and I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. So I'm answering what is the remainder, meaning I'm just going to take it and bring it up and rewrite it right next to the 9. And there's my answer, 9 remainder 1. That wasn't too bad, was it? We're going to go through 5 more examples, so I promise you'll catch on. There's my remainder of 1. Hi, Joe. All right, let's try letter O, 22 divided by 3. Here is our steps, 22 divided by 3. Step 1 is the division part. So we're thinking, how many groups of 3 can I make in 22? So looking at a multiplication table, I'm going to go down my 3's facts. And another way of thinking about this is I'm trying to think about what number times 3, what number when I multiply it by 3 gets me the closest to 22 without going over. So going down my 3's facts, the closest I can get to 22 without going over is 21. That's not the answer though. The question I'm asking for dividing is what number did I multiply by 3 to get that? And that is going to cross it. It is 7. That's what I'm going to write as the answer to my division problem. So looking at your picture, how many groups of 3 can I make in 22? Here's how we would get 7 from the picture. I'd be circling groups of 3, and it's kind of awkward the way these are arranged. So you have to kind of make some L-shaped groups here. So there's 1 group of 3, 2, 3 groups of 3, 4 groups of 3, 5 groups of 3, 6 groups of 3, and let's circle it this way, 7 groups of 3. So that's the division part. But as I said, that's not all to one of these problems. There's also a leftover part that we have to record as part of our answer. And in this picture, it's really easy to see what the remainder is. But if I'm solving it mathematically, I'm going to go through 3 steps to do that. So to figure out how many are left over, I first need to know how many are in groups right now. How many of them are circled and in a group? So to do that, I multiply. And it's multiplying. How many did I use up making those 7 groups of 3? So I'm going to take that 7 that I just wrote down, how many groups I could make, multiply it by 3, that's how many is supposed to be in each group, and write my answer underneath my dividend. So using a multiplication table, I just reverse my thinking and look at it. 7 times 3 is 21, and I'm done with that step. Step 3 is to subtract. Now that I know how many are in groups, I need to know how many are not in groups. That's a subtraction problem. Take the total minus how many were in groups and subtract. I'm trying to figure out, after I've made as many groups as I can, what's left over. So I'm subtracting. 2 minus 1 is 1, and that's it for that step. And then the last step is just a rewriting step. After I've done that subtraction problem and I've got my 1 down there, I need to go ahead and rewrite it. So I'm going to bring it up to show my remainder, which just means I rewrite it up here. 7 remainder 1. There's poor Joe, a remainder of 1 again in this problem. Let's try letter N together. 43 divided by 5. So I'm going to divide first and think, how many groups of 5 can I make in 43? So looking at my multiplication table, another way to think about this is, what number times 5 gets me the closest to 43 without going over? So going down my 5 stacks, the closest I can get to 43 without going over is 40. And then going across, how many groups of 5 was that? That was 8 groups of 5. So that's my division answer up there on top. Looking at it from a picture perspective, I'm going to count out groups of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Look at it that way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So in 43, I made 8 groups of 5. Now I need to figure out how many are left over after I made those 8 groups of 5. So the last 3 steps here are going to help me do that. I first need to know how many are in those 8 groups of 5. So that's a multiplication problem. How many did I use up making my 8 groups of 5? So looking back at my multiplication table, I'm going to figure out what 8 times 5 is, which just means I'm just going to flip what I just looked at, and the answer there is 40. So I write down my 40, then I go ahead and subtract. After I've made as many groups as I can, what's left over? So I subtract 43 minus 40. 3 minus 0 is 3. And then my last step is to bring up what's the remainder. I just rewrite that 3 from the subtraction up there, and I've got 8 remainder 3. And if I move my head out of the way, there I am. See, I've got 3 left over. Joe's not by himself this time around. We have a remainder of 3. All right, let's try letter S. 56 divided by 6. Going through our 4 steps, we'll start with division. We think about how many groups of 6 can I make in 56? How many groups of 6 can I make in 56? So pulling out a multiplication table, another way to think about this is what number times 6 gets me the closest to 56 without going over. So going down my 6's facts, I would look and see which is the closest to 56 I can get. And that is 9 over here. 54 is the closest I can get. And that's going to be 9 groups of 6. That's going to get me that as close as I can. Now I go ahead and let me show it to you with your blocks. I'm circling groups of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One group of 6. 2, 3, 4, 5 groups of 6. Now I'm going to try counting this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 groups of 6, 7 groups of 6, 8 groups of 6, and 9 groups of 6. So there it is, 9 groups of 6 in 56. Now I'm going to figure out what's left over by first figuring out how many I have in groups right now. So what's the total number of cubes that are currently in a group? So it's just reversing my multiplication or my division step that I just did. So how many did I use up making my 9 groups of 6? I'm going to take 9 times 6, and I get 54. That's what goes underneath. Looking at my picture, you can see there's my 54 of them that are in groups. Now I'll subtract to see how many are left. So after I've made as many groups as I could, how many are left over? Subtract 6 minus 4 is 2. And last step, I'm going to take that 2, and what is the remainder? I rewrite it. I bring it up and write it next to the 9. So the final answer is 9, remainder 2, and you can see that in the picture. Letter G, 44 divided by 6. Dividing it out, I think how many groups of 6 can I make in 44? So let's look at a multiplication problem or table. Since we're dividing by 6's, we're going to look at our 6's facts, and we're thinking what number times 6 gets me the closest to 44 without going over. So if I go down my 6's facts, the closest I can get is 42. And that was using 7. 7 groups of 6 will get me as close to 44 as I can. So there's my division answer. Let me show it to you with the blocks. And 7's kind of an awkward one to circle it by. So, or excuse me, 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 1 group, 2 groups, 3 groups, 4 groups. Now when I count these, I'm going to have to kind of make an L shape because there's only 5 in a row. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. There's 6 in that group, 6 in this one, and 6 in this one. So I made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 groups of 6 all together. And it was kind of awkward to circle this. In some ways, it might have been easier to use the multiplication table than to try to circle all of them that way. All right. So now that I've done that, I'm going to figure out how many of those cubes I've got in groups right now. So how many did I use up making my 7 groups of 6? That would be taking 7 times 6, and that gives me 42 as my answer. 7 times 6 is 42. Now, since I have 42 of them in groups, I have 44 altogether, 42 are in groups, I'll subtract to figure out how many are left. 4 minus 2 is 2, and 4 minus 4 is 0, of course. So I have 2 left over, and I'm going to bring that up. The remainder, writing it up here, is remainder 2. So my final answer is 7, remainder 2. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at 55 divided by 8, letter P. 55 divided by 8. So first step is to divide. I'm thinking how many groups of 8 can I make in 55? So look at my 8's facts since I'm dividing by 8's, and I'm thinking what number times 8 gets me the closest to 55 without going over? What's the most groups of 8 that I can make in 55? 56 is really close. That's the closest I can get, but that's over. I only have 55, so I can't use up 56 making groups of 8. So that means the closest I can get is actually 48. I can only make 6 groups of 8 in the number 55. Remember, I can't go over it. I can't use 56 because I don't have 56 to use to make groups. So 48 is the closest I can get, 6. Let's go ahead and circle this, and this one is really kind of awkward to circle. So I'm going to circle groups of 8. I guess I'll come down this way first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1 group, 2 groups, 3 groups, 4 groups, 5 groups, and then actually, you know what? Let's do 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 6 groups right here. And then if I try to circle a 7th group, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's only 7 here, so there's not enough to circle another group. So that shows you that I can only make those 6 groups of 8 and 55. So now I'm going to go ahead and multiply to see how many I've got in those groups. How many did I use up making my 6 groups of 8? So looking at my multiplication table, I just take that 6, work my way backwards. 6 times 8 is 48. 6 times 8 is 48, and I write it right there underneath. Now I'm going to go ahead and subtract. So after I make all my groups, how many are left? So subtracting, this one I actually have to do some regrouping for. If I have 5 and I'm trying to take away 8, the bottom's bigger, so I have to borrow. So I can just write my regrouping right here in the problem. I'm going to borrow 10 from that 50 over here. So the 5 tens becomes 4 tens. And then over here, my 5 ones are now 15 ones. And now I can go ahead and subtract 15 minus 8. We can use our picture to help us. 15 minus 8 is 7. And you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 left over. So I would go ahead and bring that 7 up to write my remainder. And my final answer is 6, remainder 7. I'm proud of you guys for hanging in there. I hope I didn't blow your minds too much with this. That wasn't too awful, right? All right, if you were keeping track of our riddle real quick, what is full of holes but still holds water? If you looked at those answers, you should have gotten a sponge is full of holes but still holds water. So as you work through the problems for the rest of the week, you do want to make sure you remember these steps. You might even want to write them down somewhere, or just remember, does McDonald's sell burgers? And use those steps to help you solve them. If you have trouble with these, try rewatching this video again. And you also can contact me, and I would be happy to do a Zoom call with you just one-on-one. So if it's something you're still struggling with, I can help you with it. Your parents also probably can help you with this too, though, because this is the kind of math that they learn. They know how to do this type. Also, if you are stuck and you're still not comfortable with your multiplication table, I am okay with you using them for right now, because right now we're really trying to learn the steps of long division. So if your brain is too full just remembering the steps, and you can't also think about the facts at the same time, you can use a multiplication table the way I showed you here. It's always better to try it without first. And then if you're really stuck and you're frustrated, then it's okay to use this as a tool to help you understand the process. Have a great week, guys.